Okay, I think in order to not delay too far, we will begin. People may trickle into the room. My name is Edward Anderson. I'll be your moderator for this session. I work for the World Bank and GFDRR. I'm also going to participate with the World Bank hat as a discussant. But before I do that, it's my pleasure to introduce this session, which is really Space for Resilient Development. And we're going to learn what can the space sector do. Space agencies and space data providers have been active for many, many years in this sector, but we feel that now is an interesting moment with the convergence of AI technologies, new satellite sensors, new satellite constellations, the data revolution applied to disaster risk information, and particularly the space sector. So we'll be hearing from 3 space agencies on what their programs are and what their experience has been, but we're going to hear about it in an Ignite style. It'll be quite a quick coverage of the existing programs. What we really want to hear from them is what they're excited about that's coming next, and how can we collaborate to really bring that into impact for implementation and disaster resilience. So we'll then have reactions from the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank as clients of these products and innovations, and also discussing what it takes to make this really work in practice. And then we'll open to a few questions from the floor as well. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists. Beginning on my right, we have Mr. Goro Takei. He is the Deputy Executive Secretary for Sentinel Asia and a satellite applications engineer at the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency. Thank you, Mr. Takei. Then we will hear from Rhiannon Price. Rhiannon is the global lead for NASA Lifelines. She's a senior advisor and has a long history of experience in the Earth observation community. Welcome, Rhiannon. And then finally, from the space agency side, Mr. Alex Chounet. Alex is a satellite applications engineer and technical officer at the European Space Agency and formerly representative to the World Bank, so I think he understands our business quite well. Reacting to those talks, we will then have Paolo Mantunta, who is from the Asian Development Bank, and he sits in the digital technologies team. He's a senior digital specialist with a focus on Earth observation. And then finally, I will allow myself to make some comments on behalf of the World Bank. I have a background in aerospace engineering and disaster risk management. So without much further ado, I would like to invite, actually one more housekeeping notice. I am told that there are applications for simultaneous interpretation. So if you would like to listen in another language, this QR code will give you an app, and it's an AI service on your phone. So I'll give just a minute for people to click that and open the app if they want to see it. The presentations will be in English, but you may want to ask a question in Japanese, and then we can use the app later in the discussion. Okay. So we'll begin with the briefing phase of this discussion for the panel. So I would invite Mr. Takei to please explain to us what is Sentinel Asia and the other JAXA activities in this space.
Thank you, Edwardson, for the introduction, and thank you very much for World Bank to giving me an opportunity to talk about our space activities in JAXA. And so my name is Goro Takei. I am a member of JAXA and also a Deputy Executive Secretariat of Sentinel Asia. So I would like to talk a little bit about what Sentinel Asia is all about, briefly. So Sentinel Asia is an initiative based on space-based international cooperation for disaster management in the Asia-Pacific region. We are to challenge for the disaster risk reduction. We have been active since 2007, so we've been here for more than 17 years and responding to more than 450 disasters, including flood, landslides, earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunami, and even oil spills. So our activities is throughout all disaster cycles, pre-disaster phase, mitigation phase, preparedness phase, which is more like capacity building, and response phase. This is emergency observation using satellites, and recovery phase. So this picture shows our membership status of Sentinel Asia. Currently, we have 115 organizations throughout Asia, and the blue dot shows the satellite data providers. These are the space agencies that owns the satellite and provides satellite images. We have 8 of them actively supporting us. And also, we do have a very, very close relationship between the International Disaster Charter to gather more satellite data from the space agencies all over the world. And using that space images, satellite images, the data analyzers, such as research institutes and universities, will do analysis to do extract value-added information from the satellite images. And the green dot shows the disaster management organization and international organizations such as World Bank, ADB, AHA Center, ADRC, ADPC, JICA, ECMOD, and UN entities like UNSCAP and UNWFP that utilizes the value-added information created by the data analyzers for their emergency responses. So the important thing is that Sentinel Asia has the member of disaster management organizations and international organizations who are the end users of the value-added products, so we can have a direct communication with them. That is very important for us. So this is the example of emergency observation. This is example in flood in Pakistan of 2022. So when the disaster happens, emergency observation request comes from the Sentinel Asia members, and we take satellite images like this. And by this image, it is very hard to find where the disaster damages are. So we do analysis by the research institutes. So in the figure in the middle, the blue area shows the inundated area. And red rectangles shows the observed area by satellites. So these data is utilized by, for instance, UNWFP. They're overlaying the population index and cropland distribution and figure out where the heavily damaged areas are. In this figure, the dark purple area is the most heavily damaged area. So these two figures are given to the disaster management organization for their decision making, situation awareness, emergency response, and planning and support, as well as UNWFP creates a flood situation report. So this is another example of the situation report done by AHA Center, showing how many people were evacuated, lives lost, injured persons, damaged buildings, and infrastructure damaged. And these kind of a report is created from our satellite images. So the right-hand upper corner, there's an inundated area extracted from the satellite images. So our challenges, what we wish to do in the future is to collaborate more with the World Bank's experiences and organizational network, including the mitigation phase, early warning, flood forecasting, pre-disaster monitoring, etc. It is very, very important because these systems, the satellite data must be combined with the ground data. And for instance, for the flood forecasting, you need a digital elevation model or terrain model to create a flood simulation, how the rivers are going to be flooded with how much water precipitating. So these data must be combined not only by just satellite data, but ground information also. And we also do a lot of capacity building, and we have a GLOF analysis, which is a glacier lake outbreak flood training with Bhutan. It's a hands-on training that we do. And I know that the World Bank had a lot of experience with GLOF in Nepal. So I wish we can have more collaboration with them also. And more for the response, we want to improve the quality and also more recovery phase activities also. Thank you. I'm sorry, last slide. Okay, just make sure, please visit to our booth. We have more information on that, and also homepage is there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Takei. Excellent, and 40 seconds before time, so much appreciated. Let's hold questions until the end. We're going to run through to now hear about the NASA Lifelines program, so over to you, Rhiannon.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you, Goro. Hello, everybody. As Ed mentioned, my name is Rhiannon Price, and I have the privilege of leading a fairly new initiative from NASA called NASA Lifelines, which is really all about community building. So we exist to bring together humanitarians on one hand and the earth science community on the other to accelerate the use of satellite data and analysis for humanitarian purposes before, during, and after a crisis. Why are we doing this? There's still huge potential for satellite imagery to really make a difference across the humanitarian spectrum. So talking about disaster risk reduction, talking about resilience, but also talking about conflict, health emergencies, displacement. There are over 5,000 humanitarian organizations around the world, many of whom are not able to tap into these data sources because they don't have the skills or the awareness yet, but they understand that there's value for their missions and that they should be using these technologies. And there's growing interest as well. We're already seeing across the world, there are over 500 applications run by humanitarians who are trying to use more and more satellite data. And there's just so much more potential for these technologies across the spectrum. And I may be preaching to the choir in this room, but satellite data is incredibly important when it comes to humanitarian decision making, not only because it offers us kind of an understanding of multiple dimensions. So we understand the social, we understand the environmental, we can understand economic components, but we can also very much center community needs using satellite data. So questions around food security, around access to critical resources, around health and well-being, just to name a few. And you can see from all of these use cases here, it's not just one question that satellite data can help us answer, but many, many questions in the midst of a crisis. So what needs to happen for humanitarians to be able to use more earth science, to use more satellite data and tools? Well, a number of things. We need more awareness building. We need more access to expertise. We need more fit-for-purpose earth science that's actually designed and tailored for these types of applications. And we need partnerships. Many of the reasons I think many of us find ourselves here in the room today, and many of the things that I think Gaurav also mentioned in his talk of where the challenges are, we're hearing that from our community and reacting. And so what do scientists need on the other hand? We've heard what humanitarians need, but scientists, to support more humanitarian needs, they want more intentional networking, opportunities to meet humanitarians who want to use their data and analysis. They want access to funders, opportunities to educate and learn. They want a chance to make a humanitarian impact with their science. Applied science is really the calling, especially for this next generation of geographers and remote sensors as well. And so we want to be able to foster these connections across the community to bring together GIS analysts along with agronomists, along with oceanographers and AI and ML engineers, folks whose expertise might find them in a silo or working with the same people over and over. And what we want to do is build community and build bridges across experts so that we can unlock more value behind the data. And so what are we doing with NASA Lifelines? What does our kind of mission accomplished look like? Well, it's really about launching community building programs. So we've been launching, we've launched 9 so far. We have one more program we're launching in October. Through those programs, building community, we want to activate at least 2,000, if not more, experts around the world to come together to meaningfully participate. And with that, we want to start to see new innovations, novel research questions, because experts from different backgrounds are coming together, creatively thinking about problems. And then from that, we want to see more of these outcomes. We want to see humanitarians who are using earth science for more reasons, more often across their organizations, but also in partnership. And then ultimately, we want to see more equitable and efficient humanitarian action as a result of all of this. And we have a very detailed theory of change that I'd be happy to share more about, but hopefully you can see kind of the path here of where community building can hopefully help solve some of these challenges and really have meaningful outcomes. So far, we've only launched less than a year ago for NASA Lifelines, and the community response has been really incredible. We have already in our community representation from 142 countries, which is kind of mind-boggling. Thousands of folks who have already signed up for our programs, who are already coming to our website. We're activating over 50 humanitarian organizations directly, and hopefully many, many more of those 5,000. And we welcome those of you in the room today to join us to be part of this community as well. In terms of what we're doing, I won't speak about all of our programs today because there are, as I mentioned, 10 of them that we've launched, but we have something for everyone. So if you identify as a scientist and you want to use your expertise to help advise and guide humanitarian organizations, there's a program for you in our Earth Science Review Board. If you want to pressure test your skills, you're a humanitarian or a scientist in a real life scenario, our humanitarian simulation in October coming up is probably for you as well. If you want to meet collaborators, you're a scientist, a researcher, a humanitarian who wants to push the next frontier, join one of our scientist speed dating events, the next one that we have, virtual or in person. And there's lots of opportunities for everyone to get involved, both in person and virtually. And so part of what we want to do is, one, make a call for everyone to sign up for our humanitarian simulation. It's the last program we'll launch, and we're running the simulation in October. It'll be virtual, so anyone around the world can participate. It'll be a 3-day crisis simulation where folks are being challenged to use satellite imagery for humanitarian reasons. So. I'll just close by saying a big thank you, and please check us out at the booth, the NASA booth. We're there with the Disasters Program, and I'll give a big shout out to my Severe colleagues as well, who are in another session right now, but who are very much a part of this community, and we'll talk more about that as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Rhiannon. Perfect timing as well. Very informative, quite different, very new. Our third space agency program is the Global Development Assistance. So over to you, Alex. As you like, whatever.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today. So my presentation is going to focus, as Edward mentioned, on the Global Development Assistance Program, which is a program we use to essentially support development banks in integrating Earth observation data and technologies to increase the efficiency and impact of their operations. So just as quick reminders, there is lots of Earth observation data and imagery available out there. Through the Copernicus program only, we deliver 300 terabytes of satellite data to society every day. And all of this is in full free and open data policy. So there's a mountain of data, and this data is not only imagery. This is essentially data that we can use to produce insights, information, indicators about gas concentration, urban expansion, vegetation indices, pollution, and so on. So, as mentioned by Rhiannon, there is a huge potential out there, untapped potential, unreleased potential that we really need to take advantage of. So having this in mind, ESA has been working with development banks on different dimensions to try and take advantage of this opportunity, right? First, of course, we've been addressing the availability and accessibility of this data through the Copernicus program. It's one of the programs, of course. NASA and JAXA work themselves through their own programs to make their data available. And then we've been through different programmatic phases focusing on awareness, acceptance, and adoption. And this has been through 3 different programs, EOWorld, EO4SD, and GDA, which were sequential, GDA having started now in 2021. Really what we aim at through those programs is to support, as I was mentioning, our partners through an ecosystem in progressively integrating those technologies in their operations. So taking the example of the ESA World Bank partnership, this takes the following shape. First, as I was mentioning, we've been collaborating with those institutions for a while, since 2008. Right now, through the current phase, we're supporting more than 80 development banks projects, and we are providing the support through more than 100 institutions and companies. So essentially, we're doing this, the support we're providing it through the European ecosystem. The reason we do that is that it's more scalable, and that allows us to kind of provide the support in a more sustainable way. The results we've been having is essentially this curve, which represents the increase in the number of projects, or the actually proportion share of projects at World Bank that mention Earth observation. So we can see there's been a steep increase from the 2000s, around 2%, to now around 12 to 14%. Of course, I don't mean that this is only the consequence of our partnership. There is a whole conjuncture out there, and a lot of people have been using more and more of this data. NASA has been working also with World Bank, JAXA to a certain extent. But let's say that we certainly have contributed to this trend, and that's really what we aim at. And it's not the integration of the technologies for the sake of it again, right? It's really because it increases the efficiency and impact of those projects. So, as I was mentioning, we provide this through an ecosystem, and this ecosystem, essentially, we tap into it kind of through sectoral activities. So we have recruited a consortium on disaster resilience, climate resilience, fragility, urban, marine, and so on, right? All of those sectors, different sectors, we target through different consortia of institutions and companies that we've recruited from the European ecosystem, and then we use those consortia to position them in supporting specific development projects across the world, with World Bank, with IDB, and with other development banks. Here are some examples of successful uptake stories, just for you to have a more concrete idea of what we're talking about. So, for example, we've been working in South Sudan on flood risk analytics. We've been supporting the government and the Ministry of Water Management, essentially, in integrating Earth observation to better analyze historic floods and also do some forecasting, right? And then the idea was to combine this support with a World Bank operation that then trained the ministry in using those technologies and transferred some of those capabilities to the country. That's always the aim, right? The aim is to progressively transfer those technologies so that there is a sustainable adoption of those tools within countries. Another example is the desert locust monitoring and drought monitoring that we've been doing in the Horn of Africa. This has been with IGAD, essentially, so a regional institution in the Horn of Africa. And again, here, we've been producing analytics, tools, processing chains, which were then transferred to IGAD and integrating in their system so that they could empower themselves in using those tools and essentially now use them on a daily basis to better analyze the impact of locust, even do egg breeding analysis to know where things are about to kind of get bad, and then analyze also the impacts related to droughts. And those are two quick examples: deforestation monitoring in Colombia. This is very topical right now with the new EU deforestation regulation that's about to become reality at the end of the year if it's not delayed again. And then slum mapping and urban heat island characterization, which we've been doing also in the west of Africa. Every time here again, the idea is really to transfer those tools either to the development banks we're supporting or to the countries. So this is a set of successful uptake stories, but there is really two things I would say we're quite excited about, because as we engage on those different topics, really the gist of it and what we really try to aim at are to find kind of scalable pathways that can be easily replicated in many different countries, right? And we've been trying to identify these 4 different sectors. One is for crop mapping and crop yield monitoring. And we're tapping here into a system that was designed over several years, several millions of investment, called Sen4Stat. So this system essentially is a lot of processing chains that are open source, but it's also a model to transfer, essentially, crop mapping and crop yield monitoring capabilities to countries. The way we do it, and that's the sequence we use with development banks, is the following. We start with a pilot that is co-funded between the development bank and the GDA program in a specific district of a country to try and demonstrate, okay, how this could work. Then we tap into some additional, what we call trust fund money in those institutions, in development banks. So another grant to do some capacity building. And with those first 2 steps, essentially what we aim at is really to convince the government of the potential and really the value of this kind of tools and this kind of systems. So then once we've convinced them through those first 2 steps, we aim at the 3rd step, which is to integrate the deployment of the system in a lending operation, which will go over a period of 2 to 3 years and equivalent to around 3 million, right? So it's a full ownership. We try to empower the government, and through this sequence, essentially, we allow those governments to progressively integrate the system, adopt them over a period of 3 years, and then do the crop mapping and crop yield monitoring themselves based on Earth observation, right? I'll be quick because I just have one last slide, but essentially this is the kind of pathways we try to replicate in many different countries. This is one for crop yield and crop mapping. We are trying to identify similar scalable pathways for other topics, could be water quality, water pollution, and so on. Last slide, this one, other thing we're excited about, of course, our upcoming constellations. Not only the one from ESA, which I'm showing here, others also from NASA and JAXA. Lots is about to be launched in space, and there will be huge value in terms of land surface temperature, in terms of CO2 monitoring, that we will be able to use to develop new applications, new scalable applications around the world. So that's the last message. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you very much, Alex. An example there of, I think, a quite focused program for the development banks. And although ESA has been working with the World Bank since 2008, what I saw is that you're really at an inflection point when it comes to adoption. You've scaled up the order of magnitude, the resources, and you've shifted from sort of demonstration pilots to co-financing of precursor services. So hopefully that really is an inflection point. But let's actually hold the questions for the space agencies, because let's hear from the ADB if it's as good as it sounds and what the experience has been. So over to you, Paolo.
You're giving me a tough task. Okay, I took the liberty to share with you, a few slides just to show you a little bit on what we are doing in ADB when it comes to the use of satellites in operations. I would like to emphasize operations because, we have many programs where we're still, prototyping the use of satellite Earth observation. But the real key part is when we get the acceptance of satellite imagery and data when we are in operation. I'm going to start with an example of ADB. I mean, it's going to be just a copter view on how we used it. Very basic. I'm sure you know this image. This one is the Pakistan flood in 2022. Very basic. I know, Rihanna, there's much more than NASA offered to us back then. But this one was very impactful because we have been asked by the board of directors, which back then was considering a big loan to Pakistan. In the end, was $659 million US for Pakistan to recover. And the question was how bad it is. I mean, we were getting news from the field, but they wanted to know how wide it was. And this one was the first image, we show to the board of directors. Once we got the green line to be using satellite Earth observation in post-disaster needs assessment, to come up with figures, we moved very fast into knocking on the door of JAXA as well, indirectly with the Asian Institute of Technology, and we activated Sentinel Asia. You know all this, this one is, a first shot on the area that have been affected by flood. Then, we didn't stop with JAXA, so we also went to ESA, and we combined, and by the way, the triggering of the activation with Sentinel Asia was actually done through the Asian Institute of Technology. So then we started to get requests for more details, scoping, zooming on urban areas, and that's where we used the ESA framework, the GDA framework, plus some funding to be given to the Chima Foundation, which I think is in the room. And we start to zoom into specific issues that, people on the ground and people at the board wanted to know. Then, unfortunately, this flooding event kept going on and on. So basically, this one is not an animation, but it's actually the synthesis on where we put all this data together. So the full team dealing with post-disaster needs assessment had this constant monitoring over several months. I should add that this was also a joint effort with World Bank, because also World Bank in Pakistan, we coordinate a lot with World Bank, and also World Bank was actually dealing with allocating loans money. So is it all done? No, it's not, in a sense that where are we right now? We are reflecting, and I guess this is part of the reaction with World Bank, really what is the level of satellites-based information that we should provide to our developing member countries, sort of a base layer to start to develop the strategy, because, you know, disasters, climate change related issues are here to come. So this is something that we're still, you know, elaborating more, you know, digital elevation model or something else, but Edward knows more about. The other point I want to make, this one is, you know, like for project-specific data and support, we still need to do probably a big effort in infrastructure for processing. Free and open data is a great thing. The slides I show you to you is actually the results of 2,000 images to be processed, not to be done on my PC for sure. So infrastructure for processing is still a need. Project-specific data, interesting talk. I would like to flag that in ADB we're very much starting on Hindu Kush Himalaya program, comprising Nepal and Bhutan for now. And also in parallel, we're just, as a part of a loan to Indonesia, we're also going to work on an early warning system for flooding as we speak, in which, you know, like the satellite Earth observation is a key component. I'll stop right there and open, you know, like the floor back to you, Edward, for reaction.
All right. Thank you for that example, though. I think it's a really nice example from Pakistan. And also, I think the reality check about, well, realistically, we're sort of in the middle of a transition. We're not quite at the beginning. We have quite a lot of experience, but the job is not done. There are, I think, many opportunities and a few challenges still to crack. So I'll take my prerogative as the moderator to give the final discussant remarks. So I have only one slide as background. But I take the message that Paolo's given, that to a certain extent, we've never had a space data strategy for development. In fact, the World Bank is developing its first ever data strategy for development. So one of the questions I will ask the panelists is, you know, should we have a special focus on space data, or should it be sort of mainstreamed into the data landscape? My thinking is that we do need something like a space data facility, because there's really two kinds of areas that we engaged. Paolo mentioned that some of these data sources are free and open, and they are effectively digital public goods for us. But then we don't really catalog, coordinate, centralize, and finance incentives for reuse, right? I think many of our teams will sometimes click or seek to procure inappropriate data sets or over-engineered data sets or just sort of national data sets, when there's a lot more that we can still do from the free and public sources. But that requires a concerted effort to sort of treat these as public goods and assets to be maintained. And by being maintained, I'm not saying development banks should be producing space assets, but maybe we can do a lot of other things to help maintain them, produce reference data, ground truth verification, help them become more customized. So the slide I have here is a little bit how we see the tech and data cycle, but this also has implications for our work, because whenever we do a technology intervention, it's really not sustainable unless there's an accompanying organizational reform to help our institutions, our clients, and our communities. So we can work with new Earth observation sources, and I took from the JAXA presentation, actually, when Central Asia works, there's 18 space agencies in Southeast Asia that are also working in the JAXA system. So we often don't think of a client country space agency as one of our direct interfaces. But in Africa alone, there's 21 space agencies, and the African Union has a space agency. So I think in the 21st century, more and more of our development bank needs to figure out how can these entities play a role to mainstream, reuse, and promote these space data assets. And then where I think it starts to get very exciting is this whole AI age. We're really not talking about a image that is downloaded anymore. We're talking about a data service that is providing indicators, characterizing infrastructure, crop conditions, hydrology and hazards, population movements and vulnerability. And these indicators are always very customized to our projects, but if we can derive them from standard recurring objective sources like space imagery, they become very powerful, but it requires a lot of new skills, I think, in the ability to really verify these models, to ground truth them, to train them. And so that's where I think the message about co-creation and the opportunity to localize is really essential. So we do more to maximize communities that are involved in not just using the data, but actually training the models, validating the models. And in this process, you can develop some of those organizational change issues. So I mentioned that, when we come in with a new data source from outside of the government agencies, this is a little bit of a sort of threat to the power balance, to the incentive structures, to the roles and responsibilities of national statisticians and surveyors and GIS agencies. So building trust, building confidence, building the skill sets to be able to validate these models and then develop and extend them and update them locally is, I think, essential for acceptance. Not only it builds awareness, but acceptance and adoption eventually. So we see this as both a technology cycle that is circular. We are not purely beneficiaries of a space asset, but we can actually contribute feedback, requirements, reference data. But it's also, I think, part of how to think of the organizational reforms that need to be embedded when we build capacity. For who and how? We're really building partnerships. You can't just go to an existing agriculture agency and train them to download new imagery. You have to help them understand how do they work with the university, with the farmers, with the startups. They're working in a different way. So I think this is still a big part of the challenge, and this maybe we're at the beginning of that phase. So I'll end my discussion comments there, and maybe I'll come back to the question. Should development banks be doing more to insist or to curate requirements, to provide and try and extract reference data from hard-to-reach countries, low-income countries, which are data scarce? And should we be thinking of a data strategy that has an explicit identification of digital public goods, particularly from space? These are sort of open questions. It's not for anyone in particular. Another question I might ask is also perhaps from ESA, since ESA is very much engaged in stimulating industry. What is the role of space agencies versus private startups? I mean, we've seen a lot of public-funded space data that's free and open, but we're also, I think, on the verge of a sort of revolution in the private sector of privately managed constellations providing all sorts of imagery. So if anyone has thoughts on that, and maybe Rhiannon, I think you might have some ideas as well. So those are my questions. I'll then maybe ask Paolo to come back after a few answers for his questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience, if that's okay. Would anyone like to comment or react? Please.
Thank you, Edward. First of all, the free and open data is very, very useful, and but only the Copernicus and the Landsat of NASA is fully open and free. And in terms of all the other space agencies provide space data for the emergency response purposes. So it's only when the disaster happens, it only lasts for about more than like 10 days or maybe a month. And then it cannot be used. There's a data policy that they cannot be used for other pieces. But as I mentioned, the challenges are for the early warning systems and the pre-disaster disaster mitigation phases. We really need to combine the peacetime data. It's the disaster, before the disaster, how the peaceful time data is, and those are usually commercially based data. They sell those data from the space agencies. So we need, like the data facility, space data facility, I think by gathering those data, the government will be able to utilize those data globally.
I agree, and I would add to that, especially maybe addressing what Ed said in terms of understanding requirements, I think is a huge need and one that's been a big gap across the humanitarian community, let alone, I think, in terms of disaster specifically. And I think development banks in particular, because of how they are positioned because of the extensive reach can play a really significant role in understanding and feeding back those requirements into space agencies so that, as I mentioned, the science can be more fit for purpose so that as we're starting to translate down that data value chain back to the adoption so we can see more of that curve that Alex showed in his graph, more and more and more, we need to be able to have those feedback loops. And I think there's a gap there because we haven't had those intermediaries playing those roles between, community adopters on one hand and the scientists and space agencies on the other. And so I think it's absolutely a need and something where I think we could also uncover new research applications out of that process and also justify the need for digital public infrastructure, which we're struggling to have the business case there, in part because we don't have those requirements. We don't have the demand signal from the community quite yet. And so I would wholeheartedly agree in terms of that need. Just to quickly touch on Ed's other question in terms of the public assets and the value there, it's incredible in terms of the untapped potential, as I mentioned, of even just the public assets. But when you think about combining public assets with this incredible, space age that we're having right now on the commercial side as well, and where we're seeing innovation there in terms of improved access, even to commercial assets alongside public assets, there is so much more value to be unlocked that if we can start to understand requirements not only on the public assets, but also in those combinations, not even of just EO data. That's all we're talking about right now, right? But and we are special and we have certain special needs when it comes to Earth observation. But if you're thinking about mobility data and the value that unlocks alongside satellite imagery and analysis or social media feeds alongside these types of things, big geospatial data, that's where I think we start to get an even greater justification for the digital public investments that we need to make a difference, locally speaking.
Thank you. Any comments, Alex?
Yeah, just, very quickly to complement on fragmentation and understanding requirements. I guess to help someone to a certain extent, you need to understand what they need, right? But if you ask them what they need and they say, I don't know, then it becomes complicated to kind of support this person and help them. So I'm not saying this is what has been happening with development banks, but in the early days, it was very difficult to kind of extract those requirements from them and from the World Bank because there is such a fragmented use of those technologies across the whole portfolio with different people using them in a different way that was very complicated to understand what is the recurring demand, what we should focus on, right? We have a program to support, but if we don't know where to target and then what topics to target, it's difficult to use then this program efficiently. So I guess then I very much agree that integrating a space data aspect in the new data strategy of the bank would be extremely relevant, and this idea of the space data strategy or the data strategy with the space aspect and the space data facility would certainly help with this process. It would not only help in having the World Bank save money in all the different space data it's procuring in a fragmented way today, but it will also help to feed back all the partners of World Bank with the right requirements so that we can engage with you and really take advantage best as possible of those programs we have to support you. Then, as you mentioned there is a whole idea of how we can actually also build on your capabilities and then on your expertise. And I think there is lots of opportunities to do that. ESA invests a lot amount of money in global data sets, new processing chains, and a lot of it needs a lot of training data. And then our objective is really then for this to be used and adopted by countries. And the reality is that the World Bank has a lot of capabilities either to collect this training data or to build capabilities in those countries to use this kind of algorithm for global data sets that we're producing. So if we manage to kind of frame this in a much more coherent and coordinated strategy, it can only benefit both sides in a sense.
Thank you, Alex. Just a quick reflection on your comment about you need that recurring demand signal. Implicit criticism, I understand, of sort of the banks for not being able to articulate it. I would say it's a bit worse than that. We don't even have a measure of recurring expenditure on satellite imagery. It was only 3 years ago that we codified satellite imagery as a specific procurement category. So mostly it's embedded in our consulting services, our technical assistants, and it's our contractors that buy the imagery. and we don't have a clear picture of our recurring expenses. But I take your point that there is a potential savings and efficiency argument, and then from that we can develop technical requirements for the most recurring needs. Let me invite Paolo to ask any question he would like to pose to our space agencies.
Yeah, well, basically, we couldn't agree more on the requirements for data, like at the national level, at project level. One probably important point is that in ADB, but also in World Bank, the ideal case is when satellite-based application make it into a loan, into a program to be sustainable over time. The difficulty we have, and I wonder if Rihanna probably partially already said something in there, what is the role of, what is the contribution that the space agencies can do in terms of stimulating the capacity building in the country? Just to simplify and complicate things, ADB is very prone to use satellite-based information, like in system. But if there is no demand in the loan or in the project, requested by developing member countries, becomes a little bit tough. Capacity build is an issue. Is very changes a lot across, for World Bank is even more complex, but just imagine ADB, like we start from a small island states in the Pacific, all the way to Georgia, so all across Central East Asia, different capacity. So what do you think, we should be done in terms of coordination between ourselves, the banks and the space agencies when it comes to develop impactful capacity building to really raise, more demand in the loans?
I can start with this. I think there's a few pieces. I think one, it's about tapping into the science communicators within this as well, and just the folks who can tell the stories of what did the data do, what impact did it have when we did use it successfully, what did we learn from that. And I think that's where our approach with NASA Lifelines is really mission critical right now, where we are at this really interesting inflection point, I think, where we have enough of the signal to know where we need to go moving forward. And if we can communicate where we've had success, where have satellite data made a difference in people's lives? Where are we falling down? Where do we need to tap into more partnerships to accelerate? I think that's a really key piece, is communication. And a lot of times we overlook that because we're excited by the next shiny technology, or we want things to scale. And we don't necessarily always know what it means to scale, but we want to scale. And so I think it's really about taking a pause when we can, even amidst the sense of urgency, to be able to really understand what do communities need. Because I think what you said there, Paolo, is very important, of the diversity of needs, the diversity of where folks are in terms of their skills and their capacities. That will always be a spectrum. Where it's going to be different, and we want that diversity. We want to embrace that because we have opportunities to learn from each other, and that's why I think these. And I'll give a shout out to my colleagues at Servier. These kind of hub approaches, right, of meeting people locally, building capacity locally, being more tailored with our applications so that they matter and are making differences where they are applied, will make a huge difference alongside telling some of those stories. And then I think it feeds into that same machinery of understanding better the use cases, understanding more on the demand side, so that you can understand for a user who perhaps isn't as sophisticated, what are their requirements. So to Alex's point, they might not know what they need. They need an intermediary. They need someone who understands the science, but also understands the community needs and is listening to be able to help translate some of that. And so I think we just simply cannot undervalue that role of translation, of communication, and I think that's the piece that's been broken in the system for a while now. And I think that's where it makes more sense for economists and for business leaders and others to justify investments when they hear things in their own terminology, right? We can't just be, sharing science out. That's just not good enough anymore. We have to be able to put it in words that are going to be impactful for people and meet them where they are.
Yes, actually, the space agencies and especially JAXA and other space agencies actually go to the disaster management organization of the different various countries, and we talk to them. We know how to utilize our data and combine with the skills of the universities and research institutes. So how can the space data will be useful for the disaster management personnel's activities? So we just go to their office and actually really talk person to person. And that's how they understand what are the capabilities. And that's what we do as a capacity building. And in terms of that, space agencies are not really the expert of those organizational network. So we utilize, we have partnership with the Asian Disaster Reduction Center, Asian Disaster Preparedness Center, of course, JICA of Japan, and the World Bank, ADB. These entities have a lot of connections with the local disaster management organizations. So we want to do more collaboration and talk with them directly so that they would understand how they can utilize satellite data.
Would you like to comment?
Yeah, very quickly. I mean, I was trying to convey this through this not so digestible slide I showed on the Send4Stat system and crop mapping and crop yield. Essentially, I think for a lot of those countries don't come to you and talk about space data. Those countries come to you and talk about water quality, agriculture productivity, and that in the end don't care that much if it includes space data or not. They might be excited about it, but at the end of the day, they just need their issues to be solved, right? So I think that identifying what I was mentioning before, which are those specific pathways, right? If a country comes to the bank, then you have 3 steps, a sequence that you can develop where you tell them, look, if you follow those 3 steps, this 3-step sequence, then you'll be able to have your own system and do the crop mapping and crop yield monitoring at scale, national scale, and you'll save this amount of money. If we manage to identify those specific pathways for different sectors that are highly scalable, I think that's how we will really achieve adoption in those countries, because they are done with demonstrations, right? They don't want another demonstration in another small city or anything. They want something that will have an impact at national scale and that will stay, in a sense, on the longer term. So that will be my message.
Thank you, Alex. I want to thank all of you for keeping the time perfectly. Unfortunately, we were asked to start late, but to wrap up on time. So we don't have a huge amount. We've lost our audience Q&A, but I would like to maybe borrow a couple of minutes, because we should be wrapping up now, to see if there's a couple of questions that the audience does want to ask. Please identify yourself and who you want to ask the question to, and please keep it to quite a brief question if you like. So we'll take these 2 hands that went up, and then we'll end there.
Yes, good morning. My name is Yves Persona from Caribbean Development Bank. I think there are a lot of issues here that you identify, but I just want to be specific in terms of the requirement and the demands, what we see in the Caribbean, small island development state, very small. We need high resolution data for taking decisions in key sectors. And most of the time, we cannot have this resolution. And in terms of the stakeholder that we're dealing, they need specific information, like the farmer, what to do with this information. How can you help with that?
Thank you. We'll take the final question, and then we'll comment.
Probably faster than wait. My question is actually perfect segue to your question. You were asking about high resolution and the skills. Skill building and high resolution are both things the private sector prides themselves a lot in doing, and also marketing, which seems to be, or positioning satellite, is also something the private sector is supposed to be really good at. So I want to double down on your question, Ed, on the role of the private sector, because it doesn't seem at all clear to me, especially in the context of this new generation that comes from venture capital that also seeks very high profit margins for their operations. Oh, sorry, yes. I'm Bruno Sanchez with Clay, AI for Earth.
Excellent. So please do comment on those 2 reflections.
Do you want to go on the
So, okay. one of the programs that we started at the World Bank is called Resilience Academy, which was intended for this sort of long-term skills building. And the way I sort of sometimes explain it to our projects is we shouldn't just build with our end users, we should have the tool built by the next generation of end users. And by that what we mean is that if a local student graduating with a bachelor's degree can't update the model, then it's probably too complicated a model to sustain in the long run. So when we see our investment program and it uses data and it uses models and it uses some kind of analysis, if we want those data to be an asset to outlive the project, we need an operations and maintenance plan, we need a skills plan, and we should be tailoring that to the local skills. So partnering with the universities to co-create, or the startups, spin-offs from the universities quite often, is the beginning of our steps in that direction. We haven't by any means solved it. I think there's a lot more we can do on the entrepreneurship side. But certainly localizing the mindset that a lot of these models should be developed by young, talented people that are being produced by the education system in that community as a way to make sure they're fit for purpose and sustainable is what we try to preach. It's very difficult to get a transport project or an agriculture project or an urban project to agree to put 5% of their resources towards, you know, Earth observation for agriculture or for transport in the university to help build the model. They just want the top consultant in the world to give them a big PDF of what their transport master plan looks like. And you know, you're lucky if you get the data sets. But we're trying to push in that direction to, if we can really classify these data as assets that need to outlive the project, much like the bridge or the road network should be good for 50 years. What are you going to do with your terrain model, your flood model? If you have a dredging plan for the river, who's going to update that as the environment is changing? If you need to keep hiring a global expert to do it, it becomes unaffordable and doesn't scale. So that's just one sort of reflection that I would like to put out there. Any other thoughts?
I think the question was really a great one in terms of, particularly in the Caribbean, and what is needed a lot of times for certain use cases are higher resolution imagery, right, or higher resolution data sources. And I think it's a yes and answer, right, where public assets are still going to be incredibly valuable across the Caribbean for very different purposes versus for, let's say, mapping missions or more operational missions where you need to have high resolution, but you need to have combinations, right? And a lot of times it's similar skill sets. So if you have folks who are very well suited to using public assets, they can very easily then, once they have access to higher resolution, pull that into the fold and start working on that too. And I think really it's about partnership to, one, have the pooled demand across, let's say, all of the Caribbean islands, for instance. You know, I lived in Dominica for several years, pooling demand across not just Dominica, but across the Eastern Caribbean, across all of the islands, right? Across all of the SIDS even, right? And I think this is part of what we need to do more of. That way we pool demand and pool resources so that it makes more sense to start to tap into these assets so that they can be in investments more so moving forward. And then I think it helps really build that business case moving forward. Now, to Bruno's point, that's not necessarily a business case that's always going to matter to the private sector because they're chasing billions of dollars of markets. They're not chasing, you know, always these social good, you know, types use cases. And so I think that's where we really need to have the digital public infrastructure, the public goods piece intersecting with those commercial assets because they don't always have to be just for purchase, right?
Thank you very much, Rhiannon. I believe we've really run out of the time that we can steal. The next sessions will be starting. So I want to thank everyone for your attention and thank our panelists very much. All of the agencies will have booths, so do find them at the booth.